What is new on the shelf with Phoenix? Well, The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I read this book recently, and I'm interested in Nobel Prize winning authors because they are known for their excellence usually, and Han Kang is a South Korean writer who is recognized and has won the Nobel Prize. And it's one of those things where it might be true that not all Nobel Prize winners are good, and that's understandable, and art is subjective, and so it doesn't mean that you like something just because it is acclaimed. But I was still interested about this one because I thought it was an unexpected title for a book, and actually the very first time that I heard about the book I was like, why is this book being recommended? Why should I care about the subject matter that it's talking about? What's that going to be about for a novel? And I myself am actually pescatarian, so I actually am interested in that side of it, but I was like, what can a person do in a novel that can keep my interest if it's literally about pescatarianism? In this case, vegetarianism. But I was interested because after looking into it, I was like, okay, so the vegetarianism is actually the thing that sets the plot in motion. And I decided I wanted to read it. Now, it's very interesting because the book is inspired, seemingly, by Kafka. I'm not sure if there's a direct inspiration, as if Han Kang has specifically read Kafka, but it's compared to Kafka because it's this very personal kind of narrative, and where they say, for example, I'll just read this really quickly. Han's glorious treatments of agency, personal choice, submission, and subversion find form in the parable. Ultimately, though, how could we not go back to Kafka? More than the metamorphosis, Kafka's journals and a hunger artist haunt this text. Which actually makes sense, because a hunger artist is literally about a starving artist who does his performance art by not eating, and people lose interest and he dies. And this book is about food. And I'll be honest, again, I was a little bit surprised because I was like, what is this going to be about? But I think it's well done. Now, I'll be honest. The first thing I'd like to say, just to clear the air, for myself at least, is that I actually didn't like that it was a little bit sensationalized, maybe even a lot. There's some scenes that are kind of shocking that I think maybe would have actually been more powerful if they'd been understated, but it's one of those things where it depends, because sometimes people would say it's the opposite, that the more you overstate things, the more powerful it is. Sometimes the shock is the appeal. For me, I think it lost a little bit of the nuance, though, by going into that world, but I do think it's interesting the way that this book and this writer, Han Kang, is writing in such a very visceral way. And I do like that, even if I also feel it was a bit sensationalized and lost some of the impact. But that said, what is this book actually about? Why is it about vegetarianism? What does vegetarianism have to do with suspense and with Kafka and with other works of literature and the Nobel Prize? And I first want to say that what I like about Han Kang, because I've seen some of her interviews, is that she really seems to treat writing as a personal process. Writing is about escape. Reading is about escape. And you do these things because you're looking for that kind of inner freedom. And I like that because I think it's a really helpful principle to remember that sometimes writing is about that free expression and being able to find that way out, so to speak. I myself see writing and reading as a form of escape because of what it shows me. And so I mention that because this book is okay not being flashy. And flashy might sound similar to shocking, though maybe not. But let me differentiate it really quickly. By not being flashy, I mean it's not necessarily trying to impress anybody. When I say that it feels like it's too shocking, again, I think it could have been understated. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like it's really trying to impress you, which I think is actually really interesting. At least that's my impression. But I like this book because there's a lot going on. So let me summarize it really briefly. So I'm going to butcher the names, so I'm actually just going to reference the characters a little bit loosely here. But you have the main character, which I can't pronounce, but I think it's Young Hai, and she is the main character. And to make a long story short, she decides that she's going to be vegetarian because she's been having dreams. To make a long story short, and to summarize this, she has a husband who is very cruel and doesn't care about her, and ends up divorcing her when she has a nervous breakdown, becomes manic, you could say, and succumbs to madness, and is hospitalized because all she did was go vegetarian, but her whole behavior changed. But it's sad, because you know that she hasn't done anything wrong. Just because she isn't eating meat, she hasn't done anything wrong. And I say that strongly with my own diet of trying to choose the best diet that I can, that's ethical. I do the best I can, even if it's not necessarily vegan. I do my best with it. But even with this vegetarianism, it's looking at it from the perspective of like, you have this character who's making an ethical choice because she doesn't like the maltreatment towards animals. And I think that that's interesting to think about because she doesn't like that. And so she becomes vegetarian and nobody likes it and people force her to eat. And I don't know how to read this book. This is kind of what I mean by not understating it in the writing that I feel like Han Kang doesn't quite do, which I think takes away from some of the power. But the point is, the vegetarianism becomes basically anorexia. And that, I think, is important to talk about. I think literature is a great place to talk about it. But I worry that with all of, and I won't spoil too much of it, but with all of the shocking events that come along throughout the narrative, to me it makes me feel as though it's one of those things where it's like, why is it that this person is going through so much? And I'm not even saying that it's like glamorizing it, because I don't necessarily think it is, but it sensationalizes it and it makes it seem like this is the way that society is. And even though that could be true in a lot of ways, and it might be true in some ways in South Korea if this individual writer, Han Kang, is writing from her perspective that she feels to be true about what her homeland is like. To make a long story short, it's one of those things where it's like, maybe that's what it feels like. There's a very cruel passage where they want to eat the dog, which sounds horrible, but they end up torturing the dog by making them run too fast to him by being attached to a motorcycle. Incredibly cruel. I won't go into the details. But that's what I mean by the idea of it being sensationalized. But I wanted to summarize it because to make a long story short, the character, there's another character who falls in love with her, and I don't remember his name, unfortunately. But if you read the book, which I definitely recommend and encourage, then you'll see that. But he falls in love with her. I won't give it away. I won't spoil it. He does something that is incredibly unforgiving. And then the book basically ends with this individual who is sisters to the main character, Young Hai, and she is so basically this individual supports her sister and is trying to help her, but at this point the anorexia is full blown and she won't eat anything. And I really struggle with this because one of the principles that comes out of the East, and I'm not necessarily saying South Korea because I don't know the rich history and culture, but at least in like Buddhism and Jainism and some of these individual belief or some of these belief systems, you have the idea of nonviolence and you have and samsara, no suffering. And I bring it up because that's actually what this book reminds me of, is like you have Young Hai who just wants to be a plant, which sounds absurd because it sounds like it's just delusion. But of course people who are mad tend to actually be able to reveal things about human nature that are worth considering, very much so, that isn't just madness. They seem to be almost divine in a way, or at least channeling the divinity in some way. And the reason why I bring that up is because what's interesting to me about this book is the fact that you have this character who doesn't want to harm any living being. And I don't know what to make of the idea of becoming as harmless as a plant when you're human. Because one of the metaphors, I won't spoil it, but one of the metaphors is basically hard to explain, but it's the merging of animal, plant, and human. And we are embedded in this world where we're surrounded by sentient life all of the time. And you have this main character who believes so much in this non-violence. And wow, that's to me what made this book work, actually, is this character who is just so strongly characterized, who seems to be a very good person and who is suffering herself because she isn't eating. And I've said everything about the sensationalizing and how I do have not negative necessarily, but I have mixed feelings about it. But the reason why this book worked for me, partly is just the style. I like the style. It was from 3 different points of view, in 3 parts, from 3 different characters. It seemed to be very concise, but also poetic language. And it also seemed to be not just poetic, but also kind of very, I would say, very concise at the same time. And the reason why I like that is because I think it's very deep to write that way, to have so much to say and doing it in such an artistic way. And I really like it because this writing to me feels authentic. They do call it, I believe, experimental. I actually didn't see it as so experimental, but I don't see that as a bad thing, because I think the book is actually very poetic in its language, and I think it's trying to convey things that I think are very deep. I think the characterization is amazing. I like the structure of the book. But I mention it because, to me, what I get out of the book is this very, very, very concise narrative of suffering, but that does so well with the characterization. And I just keep thinking about how, like, all of these characters in this book have something to say, and they have their own unique perspective. But it really centers around Yong Hai, who is a very good person, but who is struggling with delusions. And I wanted to say that when you have society constantly pushing against you and calling you insane, and calling you mad, and calling you bipolar or schizophrenia or autistic, it ends up in a situation where, like, you actually become marginalized because of that, because of the way that you think, and people look down on you and they do think you're crazy. And that is what madness feels like, I will say. I don't know necessarily that Han Kang has necessarily dealt with that. I really have no idea. Regardless, that's what I took away from it, is this very powerful theme about how madness influences and strikes us, and how we tend to become more and more marginalized the deeper we go into our psychosis, basically, or our madness. And I think that's a very tough thing to be aware of, because you end up in a situation where it's like you're being oppressed into your madness because of the way that people are treating you, the way that they abuse you, the way that they stigmatize you and label you and imprison you. And I just wanted to say, like, that to me is why this book works, is because I really resonated with the characters, with the writing style, and I also resonated with the theme of madness, and I resonated with the main character, Yong Hai. And I hope that you'll give it a shot. I hope that you'll read it. It wouldn't take too long, and I think that it would be well worth your time, not just because she won the Nobel Prize, but also because I think it's very, very beautiful, and it's very arresting, and it's not easy to stomach, no pun intended, but I think you'd get a lot out of it. And even if you disagree with a lot of the writing, I think there would be something gained from it that I think is very enjoyable. So yeah, I'm Phoenix. I hope you'll check this book out. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll check out my books. Hope you'll check out my other videos. I will see you soon.